Welcome back to the Dr. Snow Brain Health Show. I'm Scott Alford, your host, and I'm joined as always by Dr. Alan Snow. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about big news that just broke with Brett Favre speaking to Congress and him revealing that he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. So Brett Favre is very well known for his time with the Green Bay Packers and having 321 consecutive starts. That's a lot of football. So, Dr. Snow, let's talk about this diagnosis of Parkinson's disease with Brett Favre. So, what can you tell us about what Brett Favre revealed before the committee hearing this week?
So, he was in front of Congress, and I looked this up and got a lot of information. It was under the House Ways and Means Committee, and there was a Mississippi lawsuit that he and others have taken money to go to welfare programs and instead pocketed it for personal use. I'm not sure what's going on here, but Favre denied the allegations. He's not been criminally charged. And it was about this biotech company called Prevacus, which is trying to research a cure for concussions. And Favre raised money in recent years. And the Mississippi lawsuit was filed following an investigation by the state's auditors named Shad White. And there was the discovery of about $77 million in funds from 2016 to 2019 that allegedly went to these projects that were led by Favre and others instead of to families in need. And so this was all reported all over the Associated Press and NBC News last year. But all of a sudden in his hearing, Brett Favre said he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease at the age of 54.
54. What is that a surprising age to be diagnosed with Parkinson's disease?
Well, you remember we did a video which I want people to go back to called Inside the Parkinson's Brain, and actually Michael J. Fox was diagnosed, I think, in his 30s when he first got it. So what's surprising to me and the most interesting thing about this is that contact football, they may be linked to an increasing risk of getting Parkinson's disease. And that's what I didn't know. Remember when we talked about Parkinson's disease, we talked about a lot of these players have CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and what you see is tangles in the brain, right? So now I'm starting to think, well, do they not only have tangles, but do they also have Lewy bodies? Because you remember, if you go back to our Inside the Parkinson's Brain, the pathology are these alpha-synuclein deposits inside neurons called Lewy bodies, and they're in the substantia nigra of the brain. So this is really interesting to me because it suggests that Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and CTE, a lot of times you can get a mix of this in your brain. And there are people who have Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Now it's suggesting there are people who have CTE and Parkinson's. So there could be a combination going on in the brain. And remember, Muhammad Ali, one of the greatest boxers of all time, he had severe Parkinson's, so he was getting hit in the head, probably had CT as well, and he had Parkinson's that was visible, right? He had the tremors and the shakes and could barely walk.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. So I know you've been looking at some of the literature. What are the papers that have been published around American football and Parkinson's, and what does it tell us about the disease?
Well, again, I wasn't an expert on this. As soon as I saw the news, I started looking and doing Google searches on, is there a link between blows to the head and Parkinson's disease? And in fact, there was a paper in the Journal of American JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association, in 2023, and the title was American Football Play and Parkinson's Disease Among Men, and it was authored by Bruce et al. And here they looked at 1,875 men who were 67 years old, and they played football for at least 4.35 years. And get this, they had a higher Parkinson's risk, and 729 of them ended up having Parkinson's disease. That's about 39%. So that's an amazing. I would never have thought that football players, don't only worry about CTE, but worry about having Parkinson's symptoms. And they call it Parkinsonisms. And the odds of participants with a history of playing organized tackle football increased by 61% for having a reported Parkinsonism or Parkinson's disease diagnosis. And there is a slight difference between those two.
But I think this is so interesting to me because I think a lot of times when we see the talks about concussions with the NFL, we hear risks about CTE, but we rarely hear about other risks of stacks of neurodegenerative diseases that football players might be struggling with, not just CTE, but the fact that they could also have Parkinson's or other kinds of neurodegenerative disorders is really alarming.
It's really surprising, actually. So, football players are not going to get Alzheimer's disease. I think that's genetically different. But they have memory loss. So in CTE, one of the symptoms is memory loss. And so I would say that the football players have memory loss and, remember emotional outbursts, and they have Lewy bodies in the brain. And that's been confirmed, thousands of times by Dr. Ann McKee, her work at Boston University. Guess where this research came out of? Boston University, because they started looking at the brains of these football players, and then they found out that many of them, talking to the caregivers, let's say after they died, actually had tremors and Parkinson's disease symptoms. So, I think this is going to come up in the next few years, that they're going to start looking whether these football players had the pathology of Parkinson's, which is Lewy bodies in the brain, in the substantia nigra. They could also pick it up with an alpha-synuclein antibody, so you could actually see where it is. But then do they also have tangles in the brain, which is part of CTE, right? So this combination of tangles and Lewy bodies is exactly, what these people have and suffering from. And it's a combination of pathology and a combination of symptoms that you could actually see in the person as they age.
Yeah, I think that's really surprising. And I think it's really interesting because Brett Favre, I know he was talking about back in 2013 that he might go back and play for the St. Louis Rams. And the reason he cited
LA Rams now, right? LA.
Yeah, the LA Rams, but at the time St. Louis Rams. And
right.
He said on radio actually in Washington, D.C. that part of the reason was due to memory loss, and he had fears that there were going to be repercussions from the multiple concussions that he suffered throughout.
And he had a lot of concussions, what I heard. And so you would think, just like, was it Jason Kelsey? We talked about that, right? That he thought he had CTE for sure. And I think Brett Favre probably thought he had CTE. But apparently when he went to the neurologist, and you remember these are movement disorder specialists, he got diagnosed with Parkinson's. Now, I'm wondering, remember in our video called Inside the Parkinson's Brain, we said how they diagnose this. Like clinically, he may not have tremor or problem walking, but if they took his cerebral spinal fluid and they did that alpha-synuclein amplification assay, you remember they could pick up now Parkinson's increase in alpha-synuclein in the CSF before they have the symptoms. So that's the big breakthrough by the Michael J. Fox Foundation research, is now they could take your cerebral spinal fluid, and what they do is they add alpha-synuclein to it. If it aggregates, they pick it up that it's amplifying, and then it's actually a diagnosis that you will get Parkinson's because of this aggregation of alpha-synuclein that they could pick up. So my question is, did they actually see any clinical symptoms in Brett Favre? Did he have shaking, tremor, rigidity, problems walking? And I don't think so from what I've seen. So maybe he's diagnosed from that CSF test, which is new.
Huh. Tell us a little bit about that test, or what you know of the test.
So you remember we talked about it. It's in our video, Inside the Parkinson's Brain. Michael J. Fox Foundation, who's, raised $2 billion by Michael J. Fox alone in research for Parkinson's disease. They found a way to diagnose if a person is going to get Parkinson's by taking their cerebral spinal fluid. They add alpha-synuclein that you could buy, it's a protein, and you add it to the CSF, and if it starts aggregating, so the added synuclein will pick up the synuclein that's in the CSF that you could barely see, and it aggregates into an amount that can then be picked up by some sort of quantitation, either fluorescent or however they do it. And basically when it goes way up, it means that person has a lot of alpha-synuclein. What's happening? It's leaking from the brain into the cerebral spinal fluid. And once that increases, that's a bad sign. It's almost like a PSA test for prostate cancer, prostate-specific antigen. When you take the blood of somebody, and because I know people had prostate cancer, the levels of PSA go through the roof. And if you have high levels of PSA in your blood, you're likely have prostate cancer, and that's like an early marker. The same thing for alpha-synuclein. If you have it going way up in your cerebral spinal fluid, even before symptoms, it suggests that you have about a 90% plus risk of getting Parkinson's. So I'm wondering if they did that test. I'm going to do some more digging, see if I could find something on it.
Yeah, so given the fact that a lot of this research is developing, and I know that you have had correspondence and been in similar circles with Dr. Ann McKee, I'm curious what you think the future of looking at some of these diseases and, for lack of a better term, disease stacks with CTE and Parkinson's. What do you expect future research to be looking at?
Oh, I know that Ann McKee's looking in this right now, and her group, because some of the early studies actually came out of that group. So I think that she gets a lot of brains for people who died later on thinking they had CTE, and she actually looks at the brain. So they're doing autopsies as we speak on aged football players whose family wanted to do the autopsy and see what's going on here. Did my loved one have CTE? But I think they're also now looking for Lewy bodies, and they're looking in the substantia nigra to see if they had Parkinson's as well. And maybe there's a cross combination. I think this is what they're going to find in the next few years in research coming out of that group, that there's now a mix of CTE and Parkinson's, and symptoms may not always you'll be able to figure it out, but once you look at the pathology in the brain, you could actually see we're looking for tangles, right, in the grooves of the brain, in the sulci, and we're looking for Lewy bodies in the substantia nigra that contain alpha-synuclein. And those start aggregating. They look like these big boulders, but they're inside neurons. And they're in a part of the brain, substantia nigra, that is the movement portion of your brain that helps with your movement. I just want to talk about some other studies that I like to bring up when I was looking around, if you don't mind.
By all means.
So there was a study in 2024, so it came out this year, by Adams et al. When I say et al, it means other authors. And it was entitled Substantia Nigra Pathology, Contact Sports Play in Parkinson's in Chronic Traumatic Encephalopathy. And I'm going, wow, this is a mixture. So in this cross-sectional study, they had 481 brain donors with neuropathologically diagnosed CTE. And they found that Parkinsonism was common 24.7% of the 481 brain donors actually had Lewy bodies. So get that, this is exactly what I'm talking about. So in the substantia nigra, they found Lewy bodies. In other parts of the brain, they found neurofibrillary tangles, which is part of the CTE, and they had dopaminergic neuronal loss, and the age of deaths were significantly associated with Parkinsonism. Now, Parkinsonism is a little bit different than Parkinson's disease. So what happens in Parkinson's disease, they have Lewy bodies and they have tremors, rigidity, and movement problems. And you get similar symptoms when you have Parkinsonism as well. And what it shows is that, now this is what we're starting to talk about, that multiple protein accumulations and neuronal loss are associated with Parkinsonism in individuals with CTE in an age-dependent manner. And the findings also suggest for every 8 years of participating in contact sports, there's a 50% increase in the risk of further damage in the substantia nigra, which is the area of the brain that's controlling movement. So again, it's becoming a mix, right? So it's Lewy bodies, tangles, and you remember in Parkinson's disease, it's the dopaminergic cells that are starting to show neuronal loss. And that's why part of the treatment is giving dopamine. And the problem with that is it has side effects, and then you have to take levodopa to go against the side effects, some of the side effects of the drug. And then the drug, as you get worse and worse, is starting to wear off. And so this is part of the problems that all the patients who have Parkinson's disease have to deal with. You know, there's no
50% increase over 8 years of participating in contact sports. That's wild.
Yep.
Are there any other studies that you found notable results in?
Yes, there's a study in 2018 by Gardner et al., and it's called Mild TBI and Risk of Parkinson's Disease. So TBI is now traumatic brain injury. Well, what's it's a lot of times it's veterans, soldiers who go to war and get blown up by a bomb, basically. So, you know, they have traumatic brain injury. You know, their head could have been flying or hit a rock or something. So get this, they looked at 325,000 patients, and half of them had traumatic brain injury. Guess how many of those were diagnosed with Parkinson's disease during follow-up out of 325,000?
I have no idea.
1,462. So I don't know what percentage of that. It's a smaller percentage, but again, it shows that blows to the head, you have the possibility of getting Parkinson's disease in later life. And in adjusted models, all severity, traumatic brain injury, mild traumatic brain injury, and moderate to severe traumatic brain injury were all associated with the increased risk of getting Parkinson's disease as you get older.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, let me just go over the one thing. Let me go over the difference between, I said, I was talking a little bit about it, but I have it in my notes here. So Parkinsonism, so it's like Parkinsonism, and then there's Parkinson's disease. So Parkinsonism is a term for a movement disorder that is similar to Parkinson's disease, and the symptoms includes balance issues and stiffness in arms or legs and slow movement. So there's a slight difference. What I think is going on is that they're not finding Lewy bodies in the brain of these people, but they still have these balance issues, stiffness in the arms or legs, and slow movement. Whereas Parkinson's disease has the specific pathology that when they went to autopsy, they could actually see the Lewy bodies in the brain. So it suggests, you know, some of the movement problems may be coming from tangles due to CTE, traumatic brain injury, where you may have both. So there seems to just be sort of like a mixture of this.
Well, thank you for going over all of this, Dr. Snow. As always, appreciate your time.
And also, I want people to go back and watch episode 13 of the Dr. Snow Brain Health Show called Inside the Parkinson's Brain, where they could learn all about Parkinson's disease. We also have episode 12 of the Dr. Snow Brain Health Show entitled Taylor Swift's CTE Bombshell, where we discuss what occurs in CTE, or chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
Yeah, go back and check those out.
Okay, thanks a lot, Scott. Take care.